Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are evolving our buildings for tomorrow. And here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we interview Tim Hill. He's a research director at EcoBusiness. So this interview is on a white paper on flood control in Southeast Asia. So what we go through is the sea level and the rising seas around Southeast Asia and who's going to be affected by it, and also what other problems are going on in this area, putting pressure on the region, like population growth, urbanisation, industrialisation, infrastructure and deforestation. So we cover a lot of ground. I hope you guys enjoy this interview as much as I did, and enjoy.
Been in Asia since the early 90s in Hong Kong and India and Singapore. I came over here as a writer covering the industrial sector, so covering manufacturing in Asia Pacific. And then I got more into market research and covering business-to-business market research. And then most recently, about a year and a half ago, I joined EcoBusiness so that I could focus on market research with an angle on sustainability. So looking at areas like climate change, looking at the impact on the region, and looking at some of the business solutions that might be out there to help mitigate the impact of climate change.
Okay, cool. So can you just tell us a little bit about EcoBusiness and what you guys are all about at the company?
Yeah, sure. We're a media organisation, but we operate online. We don't publish a magazine anymore. We used to. And we focus on sustainable business with an angle on Asia Pacific. So we cover clean tech, we cover renewables, we cover waste, we cover water, all those sort of areas that are impacted by climate, by sustainability. And we look at what are some of the solutions that are out there. And what can companies do and what can individuals do and governments do better to help conserve their countries and their planet.
Phenomenal. So what we're going to cover today specifically is the new white paper on sea level rising throughout Southeast Asia. Perhaps if we can just start by just giving a brief outline of what the white paper might be, and then we'll get into more specific details.
Yeah, sure. So the paper was commissioned by Grundfos, which is a Danish company that makes pump solutions. And obviously they're really interested in this because they go around the region and they meet governments, utilities, other players, and they talk about flood management all the time and they put systems in place. Now they wanted to commission this study so that they could generate a thought leadership piece to understand what are some of the wider aspects beyond what they're seeing about how it came about the economic impact, and about the fragility of the tropical region for climate change, and particularly for flood controls. Yeah.
So you're currently in Singapore right now. So I guess you're on the ground in Asia. Is it something you can actually physically see and notice at the moment as the sea level is actually rising right now?
I think it's not so much that the sea level is rising, because if it was, then some of the countries would be just completely swamped. But what we're definitely getting, what everybody said in the survey that we've launched that was a part of the study, was that we're getting a lot more intense weather. So when we get high tides here, and the high tides tend to be coming up to the level where they're just about swamping the country. And we notice this even in Singapore, which is very well managed for flood controls. But when you get high tides, and what we're getting right now, I'm looking out of my window, and a big rainstorm coming in. When the two of those combine, then we get flooding. And we're noticing a lot more extreme weather, so a lot more extreme precipitation, extreme rain than we had, say, 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, so I guess is the current infrastructure and buildings that you see right now in Singapore, are they designed to be future ready for what's coming at the moment, do you think?
Singapore, compared to the rest of the region, has done a very good job of flood controls. Perhaps, as a lot of people say, because it's got a slightly easier situation, because it's got a much smaller land area. It's almost entirely urban. And of course, very affluent city-state. that can pour resources into making sure that the infrastructure works. So what we see right now, yes, Singapore very rarely suffers anything other than a few large puddles when we do get extreme rainfall. The last flooding that we had in Singapore was about 6-7 years ago, 2011, 2012, on Orchard Road, one of the main shopping districts, when we did have quite substantial flooding, and that was because of a particularly unusually high level of rain, and a sort of flooding that hadn't been seen in Singapore since the 1970s. So Singapore actually does a fairly good job. The rest of the region obviously has got countries which are not city-states that cover a much larger area, and they've got a lot more at stake and a lot more of a harder job running it.
So what are the countries most at risk? I mean, like, a lot of the people listening are probably from Western countries, and we're much safer compared to these countries. So it might be hard for us to visualize and understand what the issues are. But what are the countries that are most at risk?
Well, we focused our study on Southeast Asia, and what's interesting was that when we saw a map of low elevation coast zones in Southeast Asia, it was pretty apparent from the map that all of the ASEAN countries, so Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, had very large cities that were right on the coast with low elevation coastal zones. So pretty much all of Southeast Asia is in exposed areas.
And that's highly densely populated kind of areas as well. So how many people, or a proportion of the world's population, are actually in these areas? I could imagine it'd be a significant amount.
Yes, I'm just seeing if I've got the figures here. I'm not sure I've got the exact numbers for the numbers of people, but it's got more than 25% of national urban populations of Southeast Asia are in low elevation coastal zones. And Southeast Asia has about 500 million people in the countries.
Yeah, okay. So what are some of the things that are going to put pressure on the region alongside, I guess, these intense weather patterns or sea level rise? So what's putting strain and pressure on the cities of these regions?
Well, there's a number of different factors that have come together. First of all, there's the rapid population rise. So if you were to have gone back 30, 40 years ago, then the population, say 1957, was only 197 million, whereas now, 2017, it's 647 million. So the population has something like tripled in size. What's happened with that also is the urbanization rates have gone up. So again, if you go back, say, to the 1980s, most people in Southeast Asia were living, apart from Singapore, were living in rural areas. But now, more than 50% of people in Southeast Asia are living in cities. And with that, obviously, they've become a lot more affluent. So they want cars, they want houses, they want apartments. And that means there's been a lot more building going on, a lot more urban areas. So a lot more of the rural areas have been concreted over. And that creates problems such as water runoff. When water, like rainfall, hits it, heavy rainfall, when it hits rural areas, then some of it gets soaked into the land. But when it hits cities, it just runs down the streets and collects until it can be channeled away. So a number of different factors that have all come together at the same time: increasing populations, increasing affluence, urbanization, into an area which is pretty fragile anyway in terms of attracting heavy precipitation and high tides.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't sound like the best mix of, I guess, what's coming in the future, plus the population growing at such a fast rate.
Yeah.
So is there any solutions to population growth? I remember hearing once that this is going a little bit off track, but education of females is the best thing for population growth or something. But I could have been dreaming that. I don't know. But is there any solutions to these things?
I would agree that probably does help. Certainly, the richer, more affluent people become, the less likely, and the more urban that they become, the more likely they are to have fewer children. And Singapore has noticed this. Hong Kong pretty much the same. They went through periods of rapid population growth in the 60s and 70s, and then as they became more affluent and more urban, then the reproduction rates dropped off quite massively, and so now they're no longer at the rates of sustainability for the population. But the surrounding countries, so such as Indonesia, for instance, and Philippines, are still enjoying very healthy levels of population growth. But I don't expect we will get the tripling of population numbers in the next, say, 30, 40 years. At least certainly I hope we don't, because that would cause a tremendous problem for housing people and also the impact on the climate.
Yeah, and I could imagine, is food scarcity mentioned much at all in the area if there's such a population growth, and can the land actually support feeding so many people as well?
Well, that's a very good point, because obviously as more and more land is used for urban purposes, then more and more food increasingly has to be imported from other areas. So although it isn't right now a problem, it's something I expect will be so in the future. Certainly for Singapore, where I'm based, almost all the food is imported.
Yeah. Okay. So, and there's another thing. So in Asia, I've read somewhere that there's high rates of deforestation. Is that also an issue in the region?
Absolutely. In Southeast Asia, the deforestation rates have been quite dramatic, and I've noticed it in the time that I've been here. I haven't got the exact figures for it, but hence the expectation as much as I'm just checking if I have the figures. I don't think I have them to hand, but it's been quite substantial, and that of course has impacted rainfalls as well, created more drier areas, and create a lot more problems.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess moving maybe on now to some of your background, what do you think some of the economic fallout might be of what's to come with all the impacts we just briefly mentioned?
Well, it's been some organisations have taken a stab at looking at the economic impact, and it has been quite substantial. So according to OECD, they estimate that in Southeast Asia, the exposed assets by the 2070s will be 2.8 billion. 2,800 billion dollars of exposed assets by the 2070s, and they've done this by cities. They looked at which cities are most at risk, and certainly they've pinpointed Indonesia. So Jakarta, 321 billion assets at risk, and then other cities in Jakarta, Palembang, Surabaya, Ujung Pandang, again similar or smaller amounts, but again it all adds up to a huge amount that businesses and people will stand to lose if the floods do come, the climates do change in the way they're predicted to.
Yeah. So by assets, what do you mean by assets? Is that like the physical buildings, or is that I guess what their economies produce, like agriculture or things like that?
Yes, well, all of that. So damage to infrastructure, to buildings, to homes, to businesses, to commodities, to livestock, and so on. So OECD have attempted to sort of quantify that and just put a number on what will be the damage, the cost to the economies of that.
It's hard to comprehend with numbers so big, but if we saw that up front right now, I think people would potentially act a lot quicker, and then I guess become investors or donate to your white paper and help support you guys a bit more.
That would be great. Or even if people could just start to think about using clean energy. start to think about their impact on the environment. That would be the main message, the main point.
Yeah. Just quickly, Tim, is that what's motivating you at the moment, is to just help these guys out on the other side of the world and have a positive contribution and do what you can to stop what's coming with the climate?
Certainly for all of us in eco-business, yes, that's an underlying aim for all of us, is just to help get the message out, to change behaviours, to get people more conscious of what they can do either as a business or as an individual, and also what they should be speaking to their governments about in terms of sustainable activities that will help to put the planet back on its feet again.
So I guess just touching on the government, do you think they're doing enough? Are they being proactive from what you see around the world or in the Southeast Asia region? Are they preparing properly for what's coming?
Well, this was a question that we asked in our survey that we did of respondents in the region, and most respondents that we spoke to felt that no, they didn't think the governments were doing enough. They didn't think that they were investing enough in it. They didn't think that the governments were speaking to other governments. They weren't sharing best practices. Sorry, you perhaps just hear a big crash of thunder behind me. There's a storm going off in Singapore right now. So yeah, there was a lot of concern from respondents about whether they were doing it well. The Singapore respondents tended to be a little bit more optimistic than the others. The Malaysia respondents tended to be most concerned about whether the governments were doing quite enough or quite the right thing. And yet also, having said that, when we interviewed a number of different organizations in the region, and we found some great case studies for what government agencies are doing in the region, which perhaps have been going unnoticed, or people are unaware of some of the great works that governments are doing to try and help out the economies.
Yeah. So I guess what are some of the things they are doing, or what are some of the things they could be doing, you think, to being more effective?
Well, one of the trends that we noticed in the course of writing this paper was the way that.
Oh wow!
Sorry,
that is
the storms here can be quite dramatic. Is the way that governments are getting people to interact with water again. So up until quite recently, most governments would fence people off from water, from rivers, from canals, from lakes and from reservoirs. Now they're trying to get people to interact more with those and to use those for walking along, for canoeing in or paddling in. Hopefully, I think that what they're trying to do is to get people to respect the water and to pollute it less. And then what we're also noticing as well is that governments have got these are using more natural ways of mitigating floods. So in the past, governments were clearing mangroves to put infrastructure in place. Now what they're doing, we've got a couple of studies of this in the paper, is they're replanting mangroves because they've realised that mangroves are a very effective way of cleaning water and preventing soil erosion for riverbank edges and for lake edges, and for preventing floods.
Yeah, cool. So is there any other, so you mentioned mangroves, is there any other solutions or technologies or things in the pipeline as part of the solution for all these impacts that are coming?
Well, there's lots of really cool technologies which are quite fascinating. So there's sensor systems which are linked to video cameras that can show the state of drains. And some of these are accessible to the public. So in Singapore, for instance, people can actually see, right now it's raining where I am, and I can actually check online and say, is there going to be, another crash of thunder. Is there going to be, will I need my Wellington boots when I step outside to go home, or is it going to be flooded in just outside where I live? So there's sensors, there's videos, there's also animation and software which are designed for modelling, looking at how rivers flow through towns, and looking at ways that governments can work using software modelling to do better channeling systems and downstream storage systems for flood modelling.
Yeah. So from your perspective, are the governments investing in some of the technologies and infrastructure to future-proof at the moment? And if not, they might, I'm not sure. If not, is there, what way can, how will the investment come into the region to help them out, do you think?
Yeah, good question. So yes, they definitely are working hard to do this. Yeah. The perception from the respondents that we surveyed was that not enough was being done, given how much is at risk. And in terms of funding, it's a very good question as to whether they are tapping stuff like ADB or UN infrastructure funds to do this. And obviously, it varies, I think, according to the countries as to how they're tapping those funds and whether those funds are available from international institutes that they can use.
So what were those institutions? That's the first I've heard. I've heard of the UN, obviously, but so do they fund some of the region's projects or things like that? Do they, or can you just explain?
So they would be able to direct funding towards suitable areas. So various divisions of the UN would work towards that. Cool. Asian Development Bank, which is an institute based in Manila, which typically allocates funding towards infrastructure projects. That's a key player that's been in the region for many years and actually has commissioned a number of studies on the impacts of climate change that we've looked at to put this report together.
Yeah, cool. All right, awesome. So is there anything else you'd like to add about the report that we haven't covered that you think I guess should be mentioned before we wrap it up?
It's a complex topic because it involves both urban and rural impacts on urban and rural people, and there are examples where governments are doing it well, and there's other examples where they're being caught off guard. I think the main message is that even if you don't believe that climate change is existing, the combination of rapidly expanding populations and rapid urbanization is creating this heat island effect. It's creating rapid precipitation, which is creating a lot of problems. And I think as individuals and as businesses, we need to be having a lot more conversations about the potential catastrophes that could be ahead, and also what we can be doing as individuals and businesses to try to mitigate it and to try and get the planet back on track.
Yeah. So what do you think are the best, some things that people can be doing if they're listening? They might just think they're working in an organisation and they're just a cog in a corporate machine where it's not really doing much. How can individuals really contribute to help out the region, you think?
Through their consumption. If they consume sensibly, then they're not using too much plastic, for instance, so they're not clogging up the waterways with disposable plastic. They're reducing their packaging. Yep. They're trying to consume products that are also ethical. If they're talking to their employers and saying, hey, what are we doing in terms of sustainability? Yep. Are we following the UN's Sustainable Development Goals? All of this is good conversations, and it helps when people start having that conversation. They get other people aware of it. They get other people thinking, what can I be doing better? Can I be conserving water better? Do I need to be leaving a tap running while I'm brushing my teeth? Or do I need to be purchasing mineral water in plastic bottles and so on?
Yeah, cool. All right. So how can people find out more about Eco Business or this study in particular? And if they want to support you guys, how can they support you?
Oh, you'd be most welcome. Well, we're online. It's a free entry to look at what all our news site, which is eco-business.com. The study that we've just been talking about is under the research site, so that's eco-business.com/research/. And you can see that on the top left, flood controls in Southeast Asia, Ecobusiness. It's a free download, as is everything else on our website. And you can see we cover all sorts of different aspects of sustainability, carbon and climate, CSR, cities, energy, and so on. Feel free to read it. If you're in an organization and you'd like to sponsor or advertise on our website, great. We'd certainly welcome that. Or if you'd like to sponsor another white paper, as Grundfos have done, for instance, so that we can help get the word out, great. We'd certainly welcome all the funding we could get.
Phenomenal. I'll put all those things in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on the show. What you're doing in Southeast Asia is incredibly important work, and I wish you all the best with your future work and projects.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Adam. Thanks for having us on the show. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Tim. Cheers. Hey guys, Adam here. Just before you go, just one quick request. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review. It helps our rating and ranking on iTunes, so more people can hear from the people who are making our cities better places for our future.